Welcome to episode 28 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on February 27th, 2020. This is our season ender. After this, I'll be taking an extra week before the next episode to regroup for season 3. And today, I have a couple of stories to share with you, as well as some songs and some news on places I'll be in the near future. First, I'd like to thank Knit Another and Sarah from Charlotte for leaving kind comments as they reviewed the podcast in iTunes. Leaving a starred review and a comment as you do it is a great way to help people find the show. And I'd also like to thank Debbie, Kathleen, Julie, and Simon for supporting the show with a monthly contribution through the Patreon at www.patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow. There are levels starting at $1 a month, and all sorts of benefits are available to patrons who support the show, so please hop over there and see if any of those appeal to you. If you'd like to help support the show, please take a look at IThoughtIKnewHow.familypodcasts.com/help. Ages and ages ago, while trying to help my mother organize her epic stash, I found an odd-looking Afghan in progress. It was about 3/4 of the way done and was comprised of long panels in an off-white wool. Some of the panels were completely done and had some purple flowers cross-stitched on them at each end. The panels were worked on a crochet hook that was about 1 foot long, which was something I'd never seen before and made no sense to me because in crochet, you rarely have enough loops on your hook to justify anything longer than about 6 inches. And the crochet stitches themselves didn't look like any crochet I'd seen before. I set it aside, intending to decide what to do with it later, and eventually I came across the pattern book for the project and learned it was Tunisian crochet. Now, I know that this is a knitting podcast. Please stay with me. There is a false barrier that has been built between some knitters and crochet and some crocheters and knitting. The existence and validity of that barrier is not at issue right now. I'm sharing a story with you, and whether it's about crochet or knitting doesn't really matter to the story. It is a long story, and there are elements that need to be woven in at various times. Just about this whole episode is this story of me and Tunisian crochet, but it's also not a story about Tunisian crochet. So don't run away. At the time that I found this project, I was not a knitter at all. So I was really interested in learning about Tunisian crochet because it made a good, sturdy fabric that was much more uniform than normal crochet. And I liked that it created a surface that was sort of squared off, similarly to the fabric used for cross stitch. So adding cross-stitch embellishments to a Tunisian crocheted Afghan was an interesting proposition. I sat down with the instruction book because this was pre-YouTube, pre-popularization of the internet, and I could not make heads or tails of the instructions and diagrams. We all learn in different ways, and I have always struggled to make sense of line drawings in craft instructions, so I knew I was not going to grasp the concept of Tunisian crochet from the booklet. I took the project to my mom, and she declared that she'd started it so long ago that she couldn't remember how it worked either. Honestly, I think that when she was confronted with a long dormant project, she just didn't want to deal with it. The way normal crochet works is that you start with 1 loop on your hook, you work your stitch, and then you end with 1 loop on your hook. You work each stitch across the row, and then you most often have to turn and work back the other way. But in Tunisian crochet, you work the entire row by picking up the stitches all the way across using a longer than normal crochet hook. And once you have all the stitches picked up, you work them all off your hook until you're back at the start of the row with 1 loop left on your hook. So that explained the super long hook. Struggling to make sense of the booklet, I got as far as understanding that you needed to pick up all the stitches all the way across, but I could not figure out how you got them all back off again. The best I could figure is that you grabbed the yarn and pulled it all just straight through all the open loops. That was not matching up with what had been done before, though. So while I adopted the project, it sat untouched for years until I finally donated it in its unfinished form to Goodwill in the hopes that someone who knew what they were doing would find it and finish it off. And that was my only experience with Tunisian crochet for maybe 25 years. Every now and then I would think about that blanket that I really did love. It was beautiful and wish I could have made it work. I do have regrets for giving up on it, but I honestly did not know where to turn to for help. My mom couldn't help. I didn't know any other crocheters at the time, let alone Tunisian crocheters. I was useless with the written directions, and I didn't know of any yarn stores in the area. I was a teenager at the time, so I sent it off into the wild. Every now and then through the years, I'd hear about Tunisian crochet and know that that was the one thing I couldn't figure out. But I wasn't without help anymore. YouTube alone was full of instructions, let alone all the online classes, blogs, and more that were now available to me. I'm also surrounded by knitting stores with informed teachers and have a couple of knit clubs full of women who collect fiber crafts like trading cards. I had resources galore at my fingertips. We're going to leave this story there for a moment because I need to take you on a trip several thousand miles away before we can pick it back up in the present day. So we're going to pull off the road and drive along the frontage road for a while. There's a bit more to see and comment upon as we pull off the main highway of the story. While I pull into a station and fill up the tank, have a listen to Yoo Soo Kim singing You and I Can Do Anything.
You and I were quite the team, unstoppable, a sight unseen, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. You and I will make this through. Together we can beat this too, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. Whoa, You and I were quite the team, unstoppable, a sight unseen, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. I said you and I can do anything, oh yeah.
If you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you know I love to travel. I made a couple of trips to the UK last year alone. I'm going back a few times again this year. France, Japan, Peru. I like to get around. Sometimes we go as a family. Sometimes I go with my husband. Recently, I've been traveling on my own. But I also have a friend I travel with every few years. In fact, we're a little overdue for an adventure, but I want to take you into a scene from one of our trips. This friend, I'll call her Jamie because that's her name, and I'm a good 99% sure she doesn't listen to the podcast because she doesn't knit. Jamie and I decided to spend some time in Spain. I love planning trips. I get on TripAdvisor and plan out every day with the historic, the quirky, the exciting. I look for hotels that are swanky or odd or just comfy, and I try to plan things that I know my travel companion will enjoy. So Jamie and I, when we travel, we don't go all out, but we do travel comfortably. However, one thing I learned is that Barcelona has a definite on-peak and a clear off-peak, and we were going to be traveling during the off-peak time, which meant that the lavish hotels were very affordable. So I got us booked into a really gorgeous, comfy, well-located hotel that included our dinner every night in their highly rated restaurant. It was a real find and a wonderful treat at the end of every day to go back to the hotel and eat amazing food before we headed off to sleep. Well, one night we were at dinner, and it's the sort of hotel restaurant that you would go to if you were having a special event dinner, like the couple seated next to us who were celebrating an anniversary. They were also Americans, but it seemed like maybe they were living locally. And you might wonder how I'd know that, but it was also the sort of restaurant that is in such high demand that while you are technically sitting at separate tables, if the table was bigger and you were sharing the dinner with your neighbors, you'd still be seated about the same distance apart. Like there was maybe 3 inches between the edges of our tables. So there's a table with me and Jamie. White tablecloths, modern bistro sort of decor, an excellent meal on the way. We're slightly disheveled from our day of walking around Barcelona, and we're seated right next to a couple dressed to the nines on their anniversary. They were there ahead of us, so they already had their food, and Jamie and I were waiting for ours, a little tired from the day and toward the end of our trip, so not really speaking a whole lot, just sort of recovering. And the wife of the couple next to us began to unload. All of her frustrations about her life and her marriage just started pouring forth. And I still, to this day, am not really sure why that moment happened and whether the fact that Jamie and I were there had anything to do with it. Was it a moment of unspoken female solidarity going on for her? Or was this just something that she'd been thinking of a lot because it was a milestone anniversary and she just couldn't hold it in anymore? I honestly do not know, but she unloaded. She was frustrated that the last 25 years had been about supporting him and his career, and that she'd not been able to do the things she had hoped to do in her own life. She felt stunted and hidden and unappreciated. She was smart, she had dreams, and she needed the next steps to involve pursuing some of those dreams because she could not carry on the way things had been going. Her voice was shaking, and her volume rose just slightly above what would be considered a polite volume in that situation. Between our own fatigue and their proximity to our table, it was impossible to not become a silent witness to what was happening. And it was awkward. I didn't know where to look. She went on, and it was clear that this had been brewing for a while, but it was equally clear that her husband was completely surprised that she had been feeling that way and was sincerely crushed that she had waited so long to say something. He apologized over and over as she continued. He kept saying that he had no idea. She always seemed so happy as a stay-at-home mom and wife and was so on top of everything. And when she'd gotten it all out, he expressed a sincere desire that she take the time to explore her interests and return to work or start a business or do whatever it was that she needed to do. In the denouement of their discussion, she turned to Jamie and I and apologized for what we surely had just witnessed. And we reassured her that there was nothing to apologize for and not to give it another thought. But that interaction was a lesson for me, a warning, a Dickensian exposure to a potential future. At the time, I was a young mother with 2 kids that I was homeschooling full-time while living abroad with a husband starting a business that was rather all-time consuming. I grew up in a divorced home, watching reruns of sitcoms from the 50s and wishing for a traditional nuclear family. I was happy to have achieved my dream in this way, but I began to wonder if I was going to get to the same point that this woman was in, sitting next to me in her anniversary dress at dinner with her husband of 25 years. Would I come to resent what I most wanted because I hadn't noticed that what I wanted had grown? This wasn't a woman who was angry about being a mom or being a wife. She was angry that she hadn't done that, and she was frustrated by her own complacency, and she was scared that she had missed her chance to do more. I don't think that the fact that she had opted to put all her eggs in the motherhood basket is the reason she felt this way, or that she was a woman. These feelings can arise in anyone who has been single-minded about their life, who picked one thing to focus on to the detriment of other interests. Maybe someone was singularly focused on their work or a television show or a hobby to the degree that they wake up one day and realize they had sacrificed balance in their life and regretted the blinders that they'd been wearing. That night, footsore and worn out from a vacation spent packing in as much of Spain as I could, I resolved I was not going to regret not doing my and. I didn't want to give up homeschooling or run off with the circus, but I saw the danger of keeping my focus too narrow. This isn't just a lesson I took in as a stay-at-home mom. This was a bigger than that lesson. I did not want to let opportunities pass. At that moment, my focus really did need to be on teaching the kids. That's where 90% of my time went. But as they grew older and more independent, and I started having more breathing room, I started looking for my and. For me, it was knitting, which I know is seen by so many as just half a step away from domesticity, but it's art, it's history, it's social science, animal husbandry and technology. Throw in the podcast and it's sound recording and marketing, customer service, communications. It's my and. And there's been enough personal growth involved that it's been expansive rather than constrictive. Sometimes travel teaches you humility and appreciation for what you have. Sometimes it gives you a better grasp of history and cultural relationships. And sometimes it puts you in a restaurant next to a woman who teaches you how to avoid the hyper-focus trap she found herself in. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get back to the story we started before. Have you been to Ashcroft Maker's site recently? Finn has been hard at work developing new shades, and they are amazing. I am particularly fond of Honeydew and Flame. This is an audio podcast, so nothing I say is going to do her new colors justice. Visit the show notes for this episode at ithoughtIknewhow.familypodcasts.com or look for the link in the notes for this episode in your podcast player and get over to her site to check out the new colors. They are gorgeous. Patrons, grab the link on the Patreon feed and don't forget to use your exclusive coupon code for 10% off your order. Thank you, Ashcroft Makers, for sponsoring the show. So, what does a sad and frustrated stranger in Barcelona have to do with an unfinished Tunisian crochet afghan that I had to abandon when I couldn't find anyone to help me with it? We live in a fantastic age. You can learn to do literally anything through the internet. Most of the time, you can learn to do it for free. I could not find a way to learn Tunisian crochet when I found that unfinished project while I was in my teens. I had no option really but to give up the project to charity and hope someone who did have the knowledge would find it and finish it and appreciate it. But it has never been easier to learn new things and expand our horizons than it is now. We are no longer limited to only drawing on the knowledge of the people in our direct circle of acquaintance. And what do we do with that? I cannot tell you how often I hear people say, I could never do that, or I would love to be able to do that, but I insert excuse here. Rather than being limited by our circumstances, so many of us are limiting ourselves. I was so impressed recently by a new member of the knit club that meets at Yoo and Yoo. A woman came in one day and saw me working on Harriet's cowl. It's big and Fair Isle and a little scary looking, and this woman locked onto it and started asking me questions, and between the questions, she kept saying she'd love to do Fair Isle but just can't. I kept encouraging her and told her to go to YouTube or to come with supplies and I'd show her. I think she came again once more and same thing. She was equally split between saying she wanted to learn and that she couldn't do it. And then one day she came in with a 2-color worsted weight Fair Isle cowl half knit. She'd taken the plunge and found that not only could she do it, but that it was super addicting. We have more opportunities than ever. Don't try to convince yourself that you are limited in areas you are not. Learn the thing. Take the plunge. Jump out of the airplane. Just remember to put on your parachute first. Don't be the frustrated person in the restaurant bemoaning the fact that you didn't do the things you wanted to do. I signed up for a class coming up in April that is an intermediate Tunisian crochet class. It's how to do intarsia in Tunisian crochet. I barely grasp the concept of intarsia in knitting. I just haven't done much intarsia, but I'm going to an event and I wanted to take a class and there weren't many to pick from. So that's the one I settled on. I was finally going to learn how to do Tunisian crochet after 25 years of wanting to know. And I signed up for an intermediate class because there wasn't a beginner's one available. So of course I needed to find a way to learn it at the beginner level as soon as possible. My first thought was to just jump on YouTube, but my local yarn store was doing a beginner's lesson. At the time, it was a month or two out, so it gave me time to finish up a few things and then I could put some mental energy towards focusing on Tunisian crochet. I went in completely clueless, unable to teach myself from a book, and needing to find an alternative learning method. In less than 2 hours, I learned enough Tunisian crochet that I'm pretty sure going forward I will be able to teach myself what I need to know from a book or a YouTube video. I have another tool in my fiber crafting toolkit, another avenue to explore. What have you been waiting 25 years to do? And why are you still waiting? I bet that for most of us, there is a way to make it happen. Maybe it's cutting a steek. Maybe it's starting a business. Maybe it's finally traveling outside of the US. It's time to do the thing. Find your and make room for it in your life. Take away the artificial barriers and deal with the real ones. You might be surprised how few barriers there actually are. Do your and. One more song for you. So fitting. So fitting. Sometimes I just find songs that I like, and sometimes they line right up with what I'm talking about. I love when that happens. This is Justin Busch with All in Our Hands.
We got dreams in our hands, better days ahead and bigger plans, opportunities and a chance, all in our hands. We've got hope in our hands, the courage to face all of life's demands, the faith that it takes to take a stand. All in our hands. There's a whole world waiting to be seen. There's a life that we've imagined only in our dreams, and it's right here where we stand. All in our hands. We got love in our hands. The whole world is watching as we dance. A wide-eyed and beautiful romance. All in our hands. There's a whole world waiting to be seen. There's a life that we've imagined only in our dreams, and it's right here where we stand. All in our hands. There's a whole world waiting to be seen. There's a life that we've imagined only in our dreams, and it's right here where we stand. All in our hands, and it's right here where we stand.
A few more things before I go. A reminder that I will be running 3 rounds of trivia at Stitches United on Saturday, March 28th. Those will be at the Morehouse Farm booth at 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. For a $5 or more donation to the MRI Maakers, who are helping raise funds for an MRI machine on Shetland, you will receive an entry card. We will grade the entries after, and the winner will be notified by email. The prize is a gift certificate for morehousefarm.com. Each round will have different questions, so come by all 3 times if you like. The first 50 people to enter at each round will receive a stitch marker, and we will have an additional gift for every participant that you will not want to miss. Find the Morehouse Farm booth by looking for the ram wearing a giant Harriet's hat. And yeah, a ram wearing a giant Harriet's hat. Between now and then, if you are following me on Instagram and Facebook, and if you are following Morehouse Farm on their Facebook and get on their mailing list at morehousefarm.com, we are going to be leaking some of the information that you need to know in order to do well on the quiz. So be sure to follow us in those places and be informed as you come into the trivia event. Second, that class about doing intarsia in Tunisian crochet, that's going to be at Wonderwool Wales. I am very excited to be heading back to Wales. When I was in college, I took a year off and spent a semester at the United World College of the Atlantic in Lantwit Major in South Glamorgan, right on the coast, in a castle, helping out in their computer labs and teaching a class in web design back when web pages were a new thing. But it was an unpaid internship and I did not have the funds to explore. So I saw a lot of the school grounds and a little bit of London before I went back home. And that's about it. I've always wanted to go back and see more of Wales. I have Welsh ancestors, and the older generations of my family were very proud to be Welsh. I will be taking 3 classes while I'm at Wonderwool, one on color theory, the one on intarsia in Tunisian crochet, and a drop spindle class, because talking to Terry Spins convinced me that even if I don't get to the point where I'm spinning massive quantities of my own yarn, understanding the process of spinning and working with some different breeds and types of fiber will add enough to my crafty knowledge to make it worth the effort. Terry's actually going to help me a bit beforehand, so I'm not totally clueless walking into the class, even though it is for true beginners. As she said in the last episode, different teachers teach you different things, so if I get some repetition, I'm sure I'll get some new information as well. If you are planning to attend Wonderwool Wales and would like to get together, let me know. I'll have lunchtime on Saturday open, and then from lunchtime on Sunday until the end of the show that day, we can work out a time to connect. So far, in addition to the classes, there are 225 vendors and exhibitors listed. 225. I will be going with a list, but I will also be taking a second suitcase. If you are thinking of going, be sure to sign up for any classes you'd like to take as soon as you can. Some of them have plenty of spots, but others have been selling out. A hospital in England has put out a call to knitters to make little garter stitch tubes for them to use to cover the IV lines on post-preemies. The instructions are in a post in the Facebook group, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. They are only used with one patient, so they're constantly running out of them. It's a great way to use up some scrap yarn and show a bit of love to a family going through a scary time. Someone posted in the group just this morning that the post has actually gone viral. And reading the story about it, it sounds like the nurse who made the request is now having to make room in her life for them as they arrive at her door. So if you would like to knit some to donate to this cause, put them in the mail to me by April 7th so I get them in time. And then I'll mail them onward while I'm in Wales, and that'll save us all a bit of postage. But keeping in mind that this nurse is getting a little overwhelmed, if you would like to just knit some of these and donate them locally, just contact your nearest hospital that has a NICU unit or a post-preemie space and talk to them and see if they'd be interested in it. It is a great way to use up some scrap yarn. If you do want to mail them to me, my address is in the Facebook post that I will link to, and I'll put it in the show notes for this episode as well. Finally, one more reminder that this is the end of season 2. I would like to thank you for supporting me in this expansive hobby of mine. Thank you for being part of my and. It's been lovely to get to meet some of you over the last year or so. When we have met, if I seemed a little tongue-tied, it's because I still have a hard time believing anyone is listening and I don't know how to react. Your support and kindness mean so much to me. I appreciate the kind corrections when I've made mistakes and the ongoing encouragement to continue. You are more than I could hope for in a listening audience and have done nothing but prove my belief that knitters are the best of people. The break between seasons will be much shorter than the break between seasons 1 and 2. I'm just taking an extra week off before I release episode 29. You can look for that on March 23rd or 24th, depending on your time zone. Thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you would like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a monthly pledge, or consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors on the website IThoughtIKnewHow.familypodcasts.com, where you can also find the show notes for each episode. Or you can help out by leaving a 5-star review and kind comments wherever you listen to this podcast. And be sure to tell your friends. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on Ravelry and Facebook are both called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time.